The steel cage rattled so violently that coffee cups fell off desks 3 rooms away. Inside, the military dog launched itself against the bars again, jaws snapping, eyes wild with something beyond rage, something closer to grief. "Put it down," the chief surgeon ordered, "before someone dies." But the night shift nurse everyone called the washout took a step closer instead. She didn't flinch when 100 pounds of trained killer slammed the cage door inches from her face. Then she spoke. One word. Sharp. Guttural. A command in a language nobody at Riverside Veterans Medical Center in Ashford, Montana had ever heard before. The dog froze mid-lunge, ears flat, body rigid. And every veteran in that hallway suddenly looked at the quiet woman in scrubs like they'd just seen a ghost walk through a wall. Before we dive into this story, stick with me until the very end. If this hooks you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this journey travels. The fluorescent lights in the West Wing hallway buzzed with the kind of irregular flicker that made long shifts feel even longer. Sarah Brennan walked past the administrator's office for the third time that night, medical charts clutched against her chest, trying not to make eye contact with anyone who might remember she existed. 5 years at Riverside Veterans Medical Center. 5 years of night shifts, double duties, and pretending she didn't hear the whispers. Heard she got medically discharged. Panic attack during basic, probably. My cousin said she never even deployed. Sarah kept her head down and kept walking. The less she engaged, the less they asked. The less they asked, the safer everyone stayed. She pushed through the double doors into the intensive care wing where the lighting was slightly better and the air smelled less like industrial cleaner and more like the kind of antiseptic that burned the back of your throat. Machines beeped in steady rhythm. A ventilator hissed. Somewhere down the hall, a television played the late news on mute. "Brennan." She turned. Dr. Marcus Vega stood in the doorway of his office, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. Chief of Psychiatric Services, Harvard-educated, 15 years of tenure, and currently staring at her like she'd just tracked mud across his reputation. "Yes, doctor?" "My office. Now." She followed him inside, noting the way he didn't close the door all the way, like he wanted witnesses to whatever was about to happen. The desk between them was immaculate. Leather-bound books lined the shelves, framed certifications covered one entire wall. Vega sat. Sarah remained standing. "I'm reassigning you," he said flatly. "To where?" "Kennel duty." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to acknowledge. Sarah blinked. "The isolation kennels?" "The DOD transferred a military working dog here 3 days ago. High-value asset. Trauma case. It's been flagged for behavioral euthanasia after multiple incidents." Vega leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "You'll monitor it overnight. Keep it sedated. Document any aggression. The termination order goes through Friday." "Termination. Euthanasia, Brennan. Use the correct terminology." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. "What incidents?" "It bit a handler during transport. Attacked a vet tech during intake eval. Destroyed $15,000 worth of medical equipment trying to break out of quarantine." Vega's expression didn't shift. "The animal is a liability. The military wants it handled quietly. We're handling it." "Has anyone tried..." "Tried what?" Vega's voice sharpened. "Rehabilitation? Talk therapy? This isn't a rescue shelter, Brennan. This is a federal medical facility. The dog is violent, unstable, and represents an unacceptable risk to staff and patients." He slid a folder across the desk. "Your assignment starts tonight. Keep it calm. Keep it contained. Don't get attached." Sarah picked up the folder but didn't open it. "What was the dog's designation?" "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Vega exhaled through his nose like a man losing patience with a child. "K9 unit, explosives detection. Handler KIA. 6 weeks ago, during a classified op overseas, the dog hasn't responded to command since. It's been through 3 facilities already. We're the last stop." He stood, smoothing his white coat. "You have your orders, Nurse Brennan. I suggest you follow them." She left his office without another word. The isolation kennels sat in the basement, tucked behind the loading docks and maintenance corridors, where most staff never ventured. The air down here tasted stale, damp, the kind of cold that soaked into your bones and didn't leave. Sarah badged through the security door and walked down a narrow hallway lined with chain link enclosures. Most were empty. A few held equipment, old gurneys, broken wheelchair parts, boxes of outdated supplies nobody wanted to throw away. The last kennel on the right wasn't empty. The dog inside was massive, sleek black coat, lean muscle, eyes like polished coal. It sat perfectly still in the center of the enclosure, staring straight ahead at nothing. No pacing, no whining, just absolute unnerving stillness. Sarah stopped a few feet from the gate. "Hey," she said quietly. The dog's ears twitched, but it didn't turn. She crouched down slowly, setting the folder on the concrete floor. "I'm Sarah. I'm going to be here for a while. That okay with you?" No response. She opened the folder. The top page had a photo clipped to it. Military portrait. A young man in desert camo, jaw set, eyes sharp. Next to him sat the same black dog, both of them staring into the camera with the kind of focus that came from knowing exactly what they were built for. Handler. Staff Sergeant Nathan Cross, K9. Designation, Reaper. Status, both KIA, OPI, Blackwater, redacted. Except Reaper wasn't KIA. Reaper was sitting 10 feet away, still breathing, still waiting for a handler who would never come back. Sarah closed the folder and stood. She walked to the gate, unlatched it slowly, and stepped inside. The dog's head snapped toward her, lips curled back. A low growl rumbled through the enclosure like distant thunder. "Easy," Sarah murmured. She didn't move forward, didn't retreat, just stood there, hands loose at her sides, breathing slow and even. "Nobody's here to hurt you." Reaper rose to his feet, hackles up, teeth bared. And then Sarah did something nobody at Riverside Veterans Medical Center had ever seen her do. She spoke. Not in English, not in anything most people would recognize. A sharp, clipped command, guttural and precise, in a dialect used exclusively by certain special operations units embedded with coalition forces in conflict zones most people couldn't find on a map. The dog stopped growling. His ears flicked forward, head tilted, eyes locked on hers with sudden, piercing intensity. Sarah repeated the command. Slower this time. Firmer. Reaper sat. The silence afterward was so complete she could hear the ventilation system humming through the walls. She exhaled carefully, then took one step forward, then another. The dog didn't move, didn't growl, just watched her with the kind of focus that came from months of training under live fire. When she was close enough, Sarah extended one hand, not toward his head, but low, near his shoulder. Let him decide. Reaper sniffed once, twice. Then he leaned forward and pressed his muzzle into her palm. Sarah felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd kept locked down for years. "Yeah," she whispered. I know. She spent the next 4 hours in that kennel. Didn't sedate him, didn't restrain him, just sat on the floor with her back against the concrete wall while Reaper lay a few feet away, head on his paws, watching her with eyes that had seen too much. Around 0300, footsteps echoed down the hallway. A young man in army fatigues appeared outside the gate, early 20s, medic insignia on his sleeve, name tape that read Torres. He stopped short when he saw Sarah inside the enclosure. "Jesus, are you insane?" Sarah glanced up. "You always this loud at 3 in the morning?" "That dog put someone in the ER 2 days ago." "That dog is grieving." Torres stared at her like she'd just started speaking in tongues. "You don't grieve a dog that dangerous. You put it down before it kills someone." "He's not dangerous," Sarah said evenly. "He's doing exactly what he was trained to do." "Which is what? Attack anything that moves?" "Protect his handler." She stood slowly, brushing dust off her scrubs. "Reaper's not broken. He's just stuck in mission mode. Nobody told him the mission's over." Torres looked from her to the dog and back again. "How do you know that?" "Because I've seen it before." "Where?" Sarah didn't answer. She stepped out of the kennel and latched the gate behind her. Reaper watched, but didn't follow. Torres crossed his arms. "You know Dr. Vega's going to lose his mind when he finds out you didn't sedate him. Then don't tell him. I'm supposed to check vitals every 4 hours. So check them." "Through the gate?" Sarah met his eyes. "You afraid of a dog who's been sitting calmly for the last 4 hours?" Torres hesitated. Then he unlocked the gate and stepped inside, moving carefully, keeping his body language loose. Reaper's ears flicked toward him, but the dog didn't move. "Talk to him first," Sarah said from the hallway. "Talk to him. He's not a machine, he's a soldier. Treat him like one." Torres crouched down a few feet from the dog. "Hey, Reaper, I'm just going to check your leg real quick, okay? Won't take long." Reaper's tail twitched once, not a wag, just acknowledgement. Torres reached out slowly and ran his hand along the dog's flank, checking the bandaged foreleg where the vet had noted lacerations from the transport cage. Reaper didn't growl, didn't snap, just sat there, tolerating the contact like he'd done 1,000 times before. When Torres stepped back out, he looked at Sarah with something close to disbelief. "What the hell did you do?" "I listened." "To what?" "To what he's been trying to say since he got here." Torres glanced back at the dog. "Which is?" "That he's still waiting for orders." Morning shift arrived at 600. Sarah was halfway through her incident report when Dr. Vega appeared in the hallway, flanked by 2 security officers and the hospital administrator, a rail-thin woman named Patricia Hollis, who wore expensive suits and spoke in the clipped tone of someone who'd spent decades managing budgets instead of people. "Nurse Brennan." Sarah looked up from her clipboard. Vega's expression was glacial. "You were instructed to sedate the animal." "He didn't need sedation. That's not your call to make. He was calm, responsive, no aggression." "You entered the enclosure." Vega stepped closer, voice dropping. "You violated containment protocol with a high-risk asset flagged for termination." "I did my job." "Your job is to follow orders. My job is to provide care." Hollis cut in, voice sharp. "Dr. Vega, is there a problem here?" Brennan disregarded direct medical orders. "I assessed the situation and adjusted treatment accordingly." Vega's jaw tightened. "You're a nurse, not a veterinarian, not a behavioral specialist, and certainly not qualified to override my directives." Sarah held his gaze. "I'm qualified enough to recognize trauma when I see it." "Then perhaps you should focus on the human patients upstairs instead of wasting time on a dog the military has already written off." The words landed like a slap. Sarah felt her hands curl into fists at her sides, felt the familiar heat rising in her chest, the same heat that used to get her in trouble before she learned to bury it. "That dog served overseas," she said quietly. "He did his job. He protected people. And now you're going to kill him because it's easier than actually helping him." Vega's expression didn't shift. "This conversation is over. You're suspended pending review." "On what grounds?" "Insubordination, reckless endangerment, take your pick." He turned to the security officers. "Escort Ms. Brennan off the premises, effective immediately." Sarah didn't move. "You can't do this." "I just did." Hollis stepped forward, voice cold. "Nurse Brennan, you have 10 minutes to collect your personal belongings and vacate the building. Any further resistance will result in termination and removal of hospital credentials." The security officers moved closer. One of them, older guy, gray in beard, gave her a look that said, "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Sarah looked past them, down the hallway toward the basement stairs, toward the kennels, toward a dog who'd already lost everything once and was about to lose it again. She turned and walked toward the locker room without another word. Broshem. 10 minutes later, she was in the parking lot. The Montana sky stretched overhead, pale and cold. Her breath fogged in the early morning air. She threw her duffel bag into the back of her truck and stood there for a moment, staring at the hospital's main entrance. 5 years. 5 years of keeping her head down, of staying invisible, of pretending the past didn't exist. And for what? Her phone buzzed, a text from Torres. They moved up the euthanasia order. Friday morning, 800. Sarah stared at the message. Friday, 2 days. She shoved the phone in her pocket and climbed into the truck. The engine turned over with a rough cough. She sat there, hands on the wheel, jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. Then she pulled out of the parking lot and drove. Not home. East. Toward the old airstrip outside town where the National Guard kept a small logistics hub. Toward people who might actually remember what it meant to leave no one behind. The next 36 hours blurred together. Phone calls, emails, messages sent through channels most people didn't know existed. Sarah reached out to every contact she still had from her time in service. Some ignored her, some said they couldn't help. A few asked questions she didn't answer, but one person responded. A text at 400 Thursday morning. Verification complete. Stand by. She didn't sleep, didn't eat much, just paced her apartment, running through scenarios, trying to figure out how to get back inside Riverside before Friday morning without getting arrested. At 1900 Thursday night, her phone rang. Unknown number, she answered. Yeah. Sarah Brennan? The voice was male, clipped, military. Who's asking? Major David Keller, DOD Asset Recovery. I understand you've been in contact with one of our K9 units. Sarah's pulse kicked up. Reaper. That's classified designation. So is the op that killed his handler. Silence on the other end. Then, how do you know about Blackwater? Because I was there. Another pause. Longer this time. Your service record says you were discharged for medical reasons 3 years before Blackwater. My service record says a lot of things. Ms. Brennan, Staff Sergeant Brennan, she corrected. And if you've got access to my file, you know exactly where I was and what I did. Keller exhaled slowly. We need to meet. When? Now. The diner was empty except for a waitress refilling coffee pots, and a trucker hunched over a plate of eggs at the counter. Sarah sat in the corner booth, back to the wall, watching the door. Keller arrived exactly on time. Mid-40s, close-cropped hair going gray at the temples. Wore civilian clothes but moved like someone who'd spent decades in uniform. He slid into the booth across from her. No pleasantries, no handshake. You shouldn't have made those calls, he said. You shouldn't have abandoned one of your own. Reaper was reassigned through proper channels. Reaper was dumped at a civilian facility and flagged for termination because nobody wanted to deal with him. Keller's jaw tightened. The dog is unstable. The dog is traumatized. Same result. Not even close. The waitress swung by. Keller waved her off. She left without pouring coffee. You want to tell me why you're really here? Sarah asked. Keller pulled a tablet from his jacket and set it on the table. The screen showed a video feed. Grainy, night vision green. A kennel. A dog. And a woman in scrubs crouched low, speaking in a language that hadn't been used in active operations for over 5 years. Sarah's blood went cold. Riverside has security cameras, Keller said quietly. Dr. Vega flagged the footage when he realized what you'd done. He forwarded it to his DOD liaison. Who forwarded it to me? He tapped the screen. You want to explain how a night shift nurse knows tactical K9 commands from a Black Ops unit that officially doesn't exist? Sarah didn't answer. Keller leaned forward. I pulled your real file, Brennan, not the sanitized version, the one buried under 6 layers of classification. His voice dropped. You were embedded with Joint Special Operations for 3 years, trauma stabilization, combat medicine, K9 recovery protocols. He paused. You were in the vehicle behind Cross when the IED went off. Sarah's throat tightened. You tried to save him, Keller continued. Stayed with him until medevac arrived. Then you disappeared from the unit overnight. Medical discharge, PTSD, the whole file scrubbed clean. He studied her. Except someone forgot to erase the part where you spent 6 months training dogs exactly like Reaper. The diner felt too small, too quiet. What do you want? Sarah asked. I want to know if you can fix him. He's not broken. Then what is he? Stuck. Stuck how? Sarah met his eyes. Reaper's last mission was protecting Cross. That's what he was doing when the blast hit. He couldn't save his handler, couldn't follow him into medevac. So as far as that dog's concerned, the mission never ended. He's still on duty, still waiting for the next command. She leaned back. You can't euthanize a soldier for doing his job. Keller was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Friday, 800. I'll be at Riverside with authorization to override the termination order. Why? Because you're right. He stood. And because I'm tired of watching good soldiers get thrown away. He walked out without another word. Well, Friday morning, 7:45. Sarah pulled into the Riverside parking lot just as 3 black SUVs rolled up to the main entrance. Uniformed personnel climbed out. Not hospital security, military police. And Major Keller, moving with the kind of authority that made people step aside without being asked. Sarah grabbed her ID badge, technically still active until the suspension review, and headed for the entrance. Inside, chaos. Staff crowded the hallways. Voices overlapped. Someone shouted for Dr. Vega. A nurse sprinted past holding a radio. Sarah pushed through the crowd toward the basement stairs. She found Torres outside the kennel, pale and shaking. What happened? He pointed inside. The enclosure gate hung open, bent. The steel frame twisted like someone had taken a crowbar to it. Reaper was gone. Jesus Christ, Sarah breathed. He broke out 20 minutes ago, Torres said. Security's sweeping the building. Vega ordered a full lockdown. Where's Vega? Upstairs with the... An alarm shrieked through the building. 3 sharp blasts. Lockdown protocol. Then gunfire. 2 shots. Distant but unmistakable. Sarah ran. To walk. She hit the stairwell at a dead sprint, taking steps 3 at a time. The alarm kept wailing. Voices echoed from above, someone screaming for backup. She burst through the second-floor door into pure chaos. Patients huddled in doorways, staff pressed against walls, and at the far end of the hallway, near the psychiatric wing, Reaper. The dog stood in the center of the corridor, hackles raised, teeth bared. Blood streaked his muzzle. Not his blood. And on the floor 10 feet away, Dr. Marcus Vega clutched his arm, face twisted in pain and fury. "Shoot it!" he screamed at the 2 security guards flanking him. "Shoot it now!" The guards raised their weapons. Sarah didn't think. She stepped between them and the dog. "Stand down," she said. "Move!" one guard shouted. "He's not attacking. He just bit a doctor." He defended himself. Vega struggled to his feet, blood soaking through his sleeve. "Brennan, you're done. You're finished. I will personally see you arrested for..." The stairwell door slammed open. Major Keller strode into the hallway, flanked by 4 MPs, all of them armed and radiating the kind of presence that made civilian security look like mall cops. "Lower your weapons," Keller ordered. The guards hesitated. "Now!" They lowered their guns. Keller walked past them, past Sarah, straight toward Reaper. The dog growled low but didn't move. Keller stopped 3 feet away. Then he did something nobody expected. He knelt. And he spoke. The same command Sarah had used, the same dialect. Reaper's ears flicked forward. Keller repeated it, slower, firmer. A release command buried so deep in classified training protocols that most handlers never learned it existed. The dog sat, then lay down. Mission complete. The hallway went silent except for the alarm still wailing overhead. Keller stood and turned to Vega. "Dr. Vega, you're under investigation for fraudulent medical reporting, negligent endangerment, and falsifying federal documents related to veteran care." Vega's face went white. "You can't..." "I can. I am." Keller gestured to the MPs. "Detain him." They moved forward. Vega tried to pull away, but one of the MPs caught his uninjured arm and cuffed him without ceremony. "This is insane," Vega shouted. "That animal is dangerous." Keller's expression didn't shift. "That animal is a decorated combat veteran. You labeled him unstable to cover up the fact that your facility has been systematically denying care to high-cost cases to protect your budget." He stepped closer. "We've been investigating you for 6 months, Doctor. Reaper was just the final piece." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. Keller glanced at her. "Staff Sergeant Brennan, you're reinstated, effective immediately." She blinked. "What?" "The Army needs K-9 trauma specialists. You're one of 3 left in the country." He looked down at Reaper. "And he needs someone who understands what he's been through." Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, looked at the dog still lying calm in the center of the hallway. Then she knelt beside him. Reaper lifted his head, looked at her with those dark, knowing eyes. And for the first time in weeks, his tail moved. Just once. But it was enough. Sarah stayed on the floor beside Reaper while the MPs hauled Vega down the hallway. The doctor's protests echoed off the walls until the stairwell door slammed shut and swallowed the noise whole. Around them, hospital staff slowly emerged from doorways and supply closets. A nurse Sarah vaguely recognized from the day shift stood frozen near the medication cart, eyes wide. An orderly gripped a mop handle like it might protect him. Nobody moved closer. Torres appeared at Sarah's shoulder, breathing hard. You okay? She nodded without looking up. Her hand rested on Reaper's neck, fingers buried in the coarse fur. The dog's heartbeat thrummed steady beneath her palm, controlled, waiting. Keller crossed his arms, studying them both. He bit Vega's forearm, clean puncture wounds. Defensive, not aggressive. We've got security footage showing Vega cornered him near the pharmacy wing with a sedation pole. He was trying to put him down early, Sarah said quietly. We know. Keller's jaw tightened. Vega's been falsifying treatment reports for 18 months. Veterans flagged for expensive long-term care mysteriously got reclassified as behavioral risks. Easier to discharge them than fund proper recovery. He paused. Reaper wasn't the first, just the first one important enough that someone noticed. Sarah looked up sharply. How many? 47 cases under review, maybe more. The number hit like a punch. 47 soldiers. 47 lives written off because some administrator decided budget projections mattered more than the people who'd bled for them. Torres exhaled slowly. Jesus. Keller gestured toward the stairwell. We need to move. This floor's still technically locked down, and I've got federal investigators arriving in 20 minutes. He looked at Sarah. You're coming with us. Where? Fort Baxter, medical eval for the dog. Debrief for you. His expression softened slightly. And a conversation about what happens next. Sarah stood, knees stiff from kneeling on cold tile. Reaper rose with her, staying close to her left hip. The position was automatic, tactical, the way a working dog shadowed his handler in hostile territory. She didn't correct him. They walked through the hospital in silence. Staff pressed against the walls to let them pass. Some stared, others looked away fast, like they'd just realized they'd been on the wrong side of something ugly. Patricia Hollis stood near the main entrance, phone pressed to her ear, face pale. When she saw Keller and the MPs, she lowered the phone slowly. Major Keller, she said, voice tight. I need to understand what authority you're operating under. Federal jurisdiction, medical fraud investigation, asset recovery. Keller didn't slow down. Your facility is under audit. Expect full record seizure by end of business today. You can't just... I already did. He pushed through the doors into the cold morning air. 3 black SUVs idled in the loading zone. The MPs split off toward the first vehicle. Keller headed for the second, pulling the rear door open and gesturing Sarah inside. She climbed in. Reaper jumped up beside her without hesitation, settling onto the seat like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The door closed, the engine hummed, and Riverside Veterans Medical Center disappeared behind them. Dick. Fort Baxter sat 40 miles east of Ashford, tucked into the foothills where the land flattened out into scrub brush and rocky terrain. The base wasn't large, mostly logistics, some training facilities, a small airstrip, but it carried the kind of quiet efficiency that came from decades of military operations running beneath the surface. The SUV rolled through the main gate without stopping. Sentries waved them through. They passed rows of identical tan buildings, a motor pool, a handful of soldiers running formation drills in the distance. Keller's phone buzzed. He answered without preamble. Yeah, we're 10 minutes out. Pause. Copy that. He ended the call and glanced at Sarah. Veterinary team standing by. They'll do a full medical workup, check for injuries from the altercation. He's fine, Sarah said. Protocol. She didn't argue. Reaper sat calmly beside her, nose pressed against the window, watching the world slide past. She wondered if he remembered this. The routine, the structure, the certainty of knowing exactly where you fit in the machinery. They pulled up outside a low concrete building marked Veterinary Services. A woman in fatigues waited near the entrance, late 30s, captain's insignia, stethoscope draped around her neck. Keller got out first. Sarah followed with Reaper at her heel. Captain Walsh, Keller said. This is Staff Sergeant Brennan, and this is Reaper. Walsh crouched slowly, extending one hand palm down. Reaper sniffed once but didn't approach. Heard he's been through hell. Multiple facilities, Keller confirmed. Flagged for termination twice. Last eval listed him as unmanageable. Walsh stood, brushing dust off her knees. Let's see what we're working with. She looked at Sarah. You're staying with him? Yeah. Good. He'll be calmer. Walsh gestured toward the building. Exam room 2. Follow me. Inside, the clinic smelled like antiseptic and dog kibble. Kennels lined one wall, most of them empty. Somewhere deeper in the building, a dog barked once and went quiet. The exam room was small. Steel table bolted to the floor, cabinets full of medical supplies. A computer monitor mounted on the wall showing vitals readouts from previous patients. Walsh pulled on latex gloves. Up. Sarah patted the table. Reaper jumped up without hesitation, settling into position like he'd done this 100 times before. Walsh worked efficiently, checked his teeth, ears, eyes, ran her hands along his ribs, legs, paws, listened to his heart and lungs. The whole time, Reaper stayed perfectly still. Not tense, not resistant, just patient. He's underweight, Walsh said finally. About 10 pounds below optimal for his build. Some scarring on his left foreleg, old injury, healed clean. Ears show signs of repeated loud noise exposure, probably from sustained combat operations. She pulled off the gloves. Physically, he's in decent shape considering what he's been through. Mentally? She looked at Sarah. That's your department. He's not broken, Sarah said. Didn't say he was. Walsh leaned against the counter. But trauma doesn't just disappear because the fighting stops. Dogs carry it, same as people. She crossed her arms. You worked with him before? No. But you know the protocols. I used to. Walsh studied her for a long moment. Keller says you were embedded with JSOC, combat medicine, K9 recovery. Sarah didn't answer. He also says you disappeared after a bad op, medical discharge, PTSD. Walsh's voice softened. That true? Parts of it. Which parts? Sarah met her eyes. The parts that matter. Walsh nodded slowly. Fair enough. She gestured toward the door. Keller's waiting in debrief room B, down the hall, second left. I'll keep Reaper here for observation. He'll be fine. Sarah hesitated. Reaper's ears flicked toward her. He trusts you, Walsh said quietly. That doesn't happen by accident. Sarah left without another word. Debrief room B was exactly what she expected. Windowless, fluorescent lights. A conference table surrounded by chairs that had seen better decades. Keller sat at the head of the table, tablet in front of him, expression unreadable. Sit. She sat. Keller slid the tablet across the table. The screen showed a personnel file. Her file. The real one. I'm going to ask you some questions, he said, and I need you to answer them honestly. Okay? How much contact have you had with former unit members since your discharge? None. None? Until 3 days ago. Keller leaned back. You reached out to 6 different people tied to Black Ops K9 programs. 2 of them are still active. 1 of them forwarded your message directly to me. I needed verification. Verification of what? That Reaper was who I thought he was. And? He is. Keller was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You knew Staff Sergeant Cross. It wasn't a question. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. I knew him. How well? Well enough to be in the vehicle behind his when the IED went off. You tried to save him. I tried. Her voice came out flat. Didn't work. The blast killed him instantly. There was nothing you could have done. Doesn't change the fact that I failed. Keller exhaled slowly. That's not failure, Brennan. That's combat. She didn't respond. He pulled the tablet back and swiped through several screens. After Cross died, Reaper was transferred to 3 different handlers. None of them could manage him. He bit one, broke another's wrist trying to escape during transport. Keller looked up. But with you, he's calm, responsive, obedient. He recognizes the commands. It's more than that. Sarah met his eyes. What do you want from me, Major? I want to know if you can fix him. I already told you he's not broken. Then what do you call it? Unfinished. She leaned forward. Reaper's last mission was protecting Cross. When Cross died, nobody gave him a stand-down command. Nobody told him the mission was over, so he's still on duty, still waiting, still trying to do the job he was trained for. She paused. You can't euthanize a soldier for following orders. Keller was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Can you finish it? The mission? Yeah. Sarah thought about the way Reaper had looked at her in that kennel, the way he'd pressed his muzzle into her palm, the way he'd stayed at her hip through the chaos at Riverside like they'd been working together for years. Maybe, she said finally, that's not good enough. It's the best you're going to get. Keller studied her. If I reinstate you, full active duty, attached to the K9 recovery program, can you bring him back? I don't know. Guess. Sarah held his gaze. Yeah, I think I can. Keller nodded once. Then he stood and walked to the door. You start Monday. Oh, 600. Report to Captain Walsh for orientation. He paused with one hand on the doorframe. And Brennan, don't make me regret this. He left. Sarah sat alone in the silent room, staring at the empty tablet screen. Outside, the Montana sky stretched pale and endless. 5. She spent the weekend in a base housing unit that smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. 2 rooms, a kitchenette, a bed that felt too soft after years of cheap motel mattresses. Saturday morning, she walked to the veterinary clinic and found Reaper in one of the outdoor kennels. He stood when he saw her, tail moving once. Walsh appeared from the office. He's been quiet, ate breakfast, no aggression toward staff. Can I take him out? You're cleared for supervised exercise. Stay on base. Keep him leashed. Walsh handed over a standard military-issue lead. And Brennan? Don't disappear with him. Keller will have my ass. Sarah clipped the lead to Reaper's collar and let him out through the gate. They walked the perimeter road in silence. The morning air tasted cold and clean. Reaper stayed at her left heel, moving with the kind of precision that came from years of training. No pulling, no distraction, just focused, controlled movement. After 20 minutes, Sarah stopped near a patch of scrub grass and unclipped the lead. Reaper looked up at her. Go on, she said quietly. The dog took off running. Not frantic, not wild. Just moving, fast and low, muscles coiling and releasing, eating up ground the way he'd been built to do. He ran wide circles around her, looping back every 30 seconds like he was checking perimeter security. Sarah watched him and felt something crack open inside her chest. Something she'd kept locked down for 3 years. When he finally slowed, sides heaving, she called him back with the same tactical command she'd used in the kennel. Reaper returned immediately and sat at her feet, tongue lolling, eyes bright. Yeah, she murmured. You remember. They walked back to the clinic in silence. Okay again, Monday morning, 05:45. Sarah reported to the K9 training facility on the north side of the base, a sprawling complex of obstacle courses, kennels, and low buildings marked with faded unit insignias. The air smelled like dirt and dog, and the particular kind of exhaustion that came from endless repetition. Walsh met her outside Building 3. You're late. It's 05:46. Like I said, late. Walsh handed her a folder, thick with paperwork. Your reinstatement came through overnight. You're officially back on active duty. Staff Sergeant E6 assigned to K9 Trauma Recovery and Rehabilitation. She paused. Welcome back. Sarah took the folder but didn't open it. What's the catch? The catch is that you've got 6 dogs flagged for termination and 30 days to prove they can be salvaged. Fail, and they get put down. Succeed, and maybe, we can stop throwing away trained assets every time they come back from deployment with issues. That's not enough time. It's what you've got. Walsh gestured toward the kennels. Reaper's in Kennel 7. The others are in 8 through 12. You've got full access to training facilities, veterinary support, and a budget that's basically non-existent. She crossed her arms. Any questions? Who's my supervisor? Me. Who's your backup? I don't need backup. Walsh's expression hardened. Everyone needs backup, Brennan, especially someone who disappeared from service because she couldn't handle what she saw. The words landed like a slap. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. That's not what happened. Then what did happen? I did my job. I came home. I moved on. Bullshit. Walsh stepped closer. You didn't move on. You buried it. And now you're standing here pretending you can fix these dogs when you haven't even fixed yourself. Sarah's hands curled into fists. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. Walsh's voice softened slightly. Look, I'm not trying to start a fight. I'm trying to make sure you don't crash and burn 3 weeks in when one of these dogs triggers something you're not ready for. She paused. You want to do this? Fine. But you do it with support. That means regular check-ins. That means backup on difficult cases. And that means you don't get to disappear again when things get hard. Sarah held her gaze. I'm not going anywhere. Good. Walsh turned toward the kennels. Then let's get to work. Buck. Kennel 7 was larger than the isolation unit at Riverside. Clean concrete, a raised platform with blankets, water and food bowls bolted to the wall, and Reaper sitting calmly in the center, watching the door like he'd been waiting. Sarah stepped inside. The dog stood but didn't approach. You ready to work? She asked quietly. His ears flicked forward. She spent the next 2 hours running him through basic commands. Sit, stay, down, heel. The kind of foundational obedience that every working dog learned before they ever saw combat. Reaper executed every command perfectly. No hesitation, no resistance, just immediate, precise compliance. But there was something missing, some spark, some connection that should have been there but wasn't. Sarah called him over and knelt down. Reaper approached and sat in front of her, eyes locked on hers. You're still waiting, she said softly. Aren't you? The dog didn't move. He's not coming back. Nothing. Sarah reached out and rested one hand on his neck. Cross is gone. The mission's over. You did your job. Her voice cracked slightly. You can stand down now. Reaper's ears flicked, but he didn't relax, didn't lay down. Just kept watching her with those dark, knowing eyes. Waiting. Always waiting. By week 2, Sarah had assessed all 6 dogs. Kennel 8, German Shepherd named Blitz, former patrol dog. Bit his handler during a PTSD episode, flagged for aggression. Kennel 9, Belgian Malinois named Havoc. Explosives detection. Refused to work after his handler died in a vehicle rollover, flagged for behavioral shutdown. Kennel 10, mixed breed named Ash. Search and rescue. Developed extreme noise sensitivity after a mortar attack, flagged for operational incapacity. Kennel 11, Rottweiler named Titan. Security detail. Attacked a contractor who got too close to his handler's body after a firefight. Flagged for uncontrolled aggression. Kennel 12, Labrador named Scout. Medical detection. Stopped eating after being separated from his wounded handler during evacuation. Flagged for failure to thrive. 6 dogs. 6 different traumas. 6 different reasons the military decided they were disposable. Sarah stood outside the kennels at 2100 on a Tuesday night, exhausted and furious, and trying to figure out how the hell she was supposed to fix 6 broken soldiers in 18 days. Torres found her there an hour later. She'd forgotten he'd been reassigned to Fort Baxter after Riverside imploded. Forgot he'd requested transfer to the K-9 program specifically. Forgot he existed outside that chaotic hallway where everything had gone sideways. You look like hell, he said. Thanks. Walsh says you haven't taken a day off since you started. Don't need one. Torres leaned against the fence. You always this stubborn, or is it a recent development? Sarah didn't answer. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I've been watching you work. With the dogs. You're good. Better than good. He paused. But you're going to burn out if you keep this pace. I've got 18 days. 18 days to do what? Save all of them? Yeah. That's not realistic. It's what I've got. Torres exhaled slowly. What happens if you fail? Sarah looked at him. They die. All of them? All of them. He was silent for a long moment. Then he pushed off the fence. What do you need? What? To make this work. What do you need? Sarah stared at him. Why are you helping me? Because I saw what happened at Riverside. I saw what Vega was doing. And I saw you stand between that dog and 2 armed guards without flinching. Torres met her eyes. So what do you need? She thought about the 6 dogs waiting in those kennels, thought about the clock ticking down, thought about all the ways this could go wrong. Time, she said finally. I need more time. Can't help you there. Then I need better intel. Service records, handler profiles, mission reports. Anything that tells me what these dogs went through and why they shut down. Torres nodded. I can get that. How? I've got a friend in records, owes me a favor. He pulled out his phone. Give me the dog tags. I'll have files by morning. Sarah rattled off the 6 names. Torres typed them in and pocketed the phone. Anything else? He asked. She hesitated, then said, Yeah, I need someone who can handle Reaper when I'm working with the others. You don't trust the kennel staff? I don't know the kennel staff. Torres studied her. You trust me? I don't know you either. Fair. He crossed his arms. But I'm offering anyway. Sarah looked back at the kennels, at the dark windows and silent shapes moving behind chain link. 6 o'clock tomorrow, she said. Kennel 7. Don't be late. Torres smiled. Yes, ma'am. The files arrived at 05:30. Sarah sat in the empty training facility office, folder open on the desk, reading by the pale glow of a single lamp. Blitz. Handler KIA during ambush. Dog witnessed the shooting. Tried to drag handler to cover. Failed. Havoc. Handler died when their vehicle flipped during evasion maneuvers. Dog trapped inside for 6 hours before rescue arrived. Ash. Survived mortar attack that killed 3 soldiers. Developed acute sound sensitivity. Stopped responding to recall commands. Titan. Handler killed by sniper fire. Dog stayed with the body for 18 hours until recovery team arrived. Attacked anyone who tried to approach. Scout. Handler evacuated with critical injuries. Dog separated during triage. Never reunited. And Reaper. Handler killed instantly by IED. Dog survived blast. Waited at site until extraction team forced him to leave. 6 different stories. 6 different losses. But the same ending. Every single one of them watched their handler die. And every single one of them got flagged as broken because they couldn't just move on and pretend it didn't happen. Sarah closed the folder and pressed her palms against her eyes. Outside, the skies started to lighten. She spent the next 10 days working with each dog individually. Blitz needed structure, routine, the certainty of knowing exactly what came next. She ran him through basic commands for hours until his body remembered what his mind couldn't process. Havoc needed motion, purpose, something to focus on besides the memory of being trapped. She built search grids and hid equipment and let him work until exhaustion forced him to rest. Ash needed silence. Space. Time to relearn that not every loud noise meant incoming fire. She worked him in the quietest corner of the base, gradually introducing controlled sounds until his ears stopped pinning back in terror. Titan needed boundaries, clear rules. The understanding that protecting someone didn't mean destroying everyone who came close. She taught him the difference between threat and proximity. Scout needed connection, something to anchor to, someone to care about. She spent hours just sitting with him. No commands, no expectations, just presence. And Reaper needed closure. But Sarah didn't know how to give him something she'd never gotten herself. Day 27. Sarah stood in the training yard at 0400, watching Reaper run obstacle courses in the dark. He moved like liquid, like something built specifically for this. Every jump perfect, every turn precise. Behind her, Torres yawned. He's ready. No, he's not. He just cleared that course in under 2 minutes. That's faster than most active duty K9S. Speed doesn't mean ready. Torres crossed his arms. Then what does? Sarah didn't answer, because the truth was, she didn't know. Reaper could execute every command, could handle every scenario, could function at a level that would make him operational in any unit, but he still wasn't there, still wasn't present, still waiting for something that would never come. Walsh appeared from the admin building, tablet in hand. Brennan, my office. Now. Sarah followed her inside. Walsh closed the door and sat heavily behind her desk. Evaluations in 3 days, she said without preamble. Board wants to see proof that these dogs are salvageable. That means performance assessments, behavioral reviews, handler integration tests. They're not ready for handlers. Then they're not ready, period. Walsh leaned forward. This isn't a therapy program, Brennan. This is military asset recovery. Either these dogs can return to service or they can't. There's no middle ground. They need more time. They don't have more time. You don't have more time. Walsh's expression hardened. You've done good work. Better than I expected. But good isn't enough. I need operational. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. And if they're not? Walsh didn't answer. Didn't need to. Sarah left the office and walked back outside. Reaper sat exactly where she'd left him. Waiting. Always waiting. Day 29. The evaluation board arrived at 800. 4 officers, 2 civilian contractors, 1 veterinary specialist Sarah didn't recognize. They set up in the main training facility, clipboards and tablets, and the kind of detached efficiency that came from reviewing assets instead of soldiers. Walsh stood at the front of the room. We'll run each dog through standard operational assessments: obedience, handler compliance, environmental adaptability, stress response. She looked at Sarah. You're up. Sarah started with Blitz. The German Shepherd executed every command perfectly. Sat when ordered, stayed when directed, healed without deviation. The board took notes, nodded, moved on. Havoc cleared the explosives detection course in record time, found every planted device, signaled every hit, textbook performance. Ash navigated the noise sensitivity test without flinching, gunfire, fireworks, thunder recordings. He barely reacted. Titan allowed himself to be handled by 3 different strangers without aggression. Let them check his teeth, his ears, his paws. Perfect. Scout bonded immediately with a new handler, young Corporal Sarah had never met, and followed him through basic commands like they'd been working together for months. 5 dogs. 5 successful evaluations. The board looked pleased. Then Sarah brought out Reaper. He entered the training yard calmly, sat at her heel, waited for commands. Run him through standard obedience, one of the officers said. Sarah did. Reaper executed flawlessly. Handler transfer test. Sarah gestured to Torres. He stepped forward and took the lead. Reaper followed him without hesitation, responding to every command Torres gave. The board conferred quietly. Then the veterinary specialist stood. I want to see crisis response. Walsh frowned. That's not standard protocol. It's necessary. The specialist looked at Sarah. Simulate a hostile engagement. Handler down. Dog must hold position and defend until extraction. Sarah's blood went cold. That's not, Walsh started. It's required, the specialist interrupted. If this dog is going back into service, we need to know he won't repeat the behavioral breakdown that got him flagged in the first place. Sarah looked at Reaper. The dog stared back at her, eyes dark and knowing. She knelt down slowly. I'm sorry, she whispered. Then she gave the command. The old one. The classified one. The one that told a combat dog his handler was down and he needed to hold position at all costs. Reaper's entire body went rigid. Torres started to move toward them, playing the role of approaching threat. And Reaper exploded, not at Torres, at the fence, at the gate, at every exit point in the yard. He moved so fast Sarah barely tracked him, slamming against barriers, trying to breach the perimeter, desperate and frantic and completely uncontrolled. Stand him down, someone shouted. Sarah called the recall command. Reaper didn't respond. She called it again, louder. Nothing. He kept moving, kept trying to break free, kept doing exactly what he'd been trained to do when his handler went down and the mission wasn't finished. Find help, get reinforcements, save them. Sarah ran toward him. Reaper, stand down. He finally stopped, turned, looked at her with wild eyes, and she realized what she'd done. She'd triggered the one scenario he'd never recovered from. The one moment that broke him, the memory of Cross dying and Reaper being unable to save him. Jesus Christ, Walsh breathed. The specialist made a note on his tablet. Behavioral breakdown under crisis simulation. Dog is unfit for operational service. No, Sarah said. The assessment is clear. He's not broken. He's traumatized. There's a difference. Not to this board. The specialist looked at Walsh. Recommendation is termination. Effective immediately. Sarah felt the world tilt. You can't do that. We just did. Walsh's face had gone pale. We can appeal. Appeal denied, one of the officers said. The dog's a liability. End of discussion. Sarah looked at Reaper. He'd stopped moving, stopped fighting, just stood there in the center of the yard, sides heaving, staring at her like he knew exactly what was about to happen. And for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Brennan felt something inside her break wide open. She walked to the center of the yard, knelt beside Reaper, put both hands on either side of his face, and pressed her forehead against his. "I'm not letting them take you," she whispered. Then she stood and turned to face the board. "You want to put him down? You'll have to go through me first." Walsh stepped forward. "Brennan. He's not broken. He's a soldier who watched his handler die and never got told it was okay to stop trying to save him." Her voice cracked. "You don't euthanize someone for that. You help them." The specialist closed his tablet. "This is not a negotiation." "Then make it one." "Stand down, Sergeant." "No." The officers exchanged looks. One of them reached for his radio, and then the door to the training facility slammed open. Major Keller strode into the yard, flanked by 2 MPs and a woman in a dark suit Sarah didn't recognize. "Evaluation suspended," Keller said. The specialist turned. "Major, we've already—" "I said suspended." Keller crossed his arms. "This board is operating under falsified jurisdiction. You don't have authority to order termination of federal military assets without DoD approval." "We have approval." "No. You have a recommendation from Dr. Vega's review board, a board that's currently under federal investigation for systematic fraud." Keller gestured to the woman in the suit. "Special Agent Monroe, FBI. She'd like to ask you some questions about your connection to Riverside's falsified evaluations." The color drained from the specialist's face. Monroe stepped forward. "Dr. Richard Kellerman, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of federal documents, and obstruction of a federal investigation." The MPs moved in. Kellerman tried to back away. "This is insane! I had nothing to do with—" "You signed off on 43 termination orders over 18 months, Monroe said coldly. "Every single one of them connected to budget optimization reports filed by Dr. Marcus Vega. You want to tell me that's coincidence?" They cuffed him and let him out. The training yard went silent. Keller looked at the remaining board members. "You're dismissed. New evaluation board will be convened next month. Until then, these dogs remain in Staff Sergeant Brennan's custody." He turned to Sarah. "That work for you?" She couldn't speak, could barely breathe, just nodded. Keller's expression softened slightly. "You did good work here, Brennan. Don't let anyone tell you different." He left with the MPs and Agent Monroe. The board members filed out behind them, and Sarah stood alone in the training yard with 6 dogs who'd just been given one more chance. Torres appeared at her side. "Holy shit!" Sarah knelt down. Reaper pressed against her, trembling. She wrapped both arms around him and held on. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're okay. We're okay." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Because somewhere in the middle of saving these dogs, she'd stopped running from her own ghosts. And now they were coming back to finish what they'd started. That night, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, staring at her phone. One message, sent 3 hours ago. Unknown number. She opened it. "You were in the blast zone when Cross died. We have footage. We have questions. Meet us or we release everything. No signature, no location, just a threat wrapped in 9 words." Sarah's hand shook. Because whoever sent that message knew something nobody else did. She hadn't just tried to save Cross. She'd been the one driving the lead vehicle that missed the IED trigger, the one whose mistake got him killed. Sarah deleted the message, but the words stayed burned into her retinas. She sat on the edge of her bunk staring at the blank screen, listening to her own heartbeat hammer against her ribs. 3 years. 3 years of burying it. 3 years of telling herself it wasn't her fault. That the intel was bad. That the route had been cleared. That nobody could have predicted the secondary device buried 6 inches deeper than standard sweep protocols covered. But she'd been driving, her hands on the wheel, her foot on the accelerator, and when the blast tore through Cross's vehicle, she'd been close enough to feel the shockwave rattle her teeth, close enough to survive. She stood and paced the small room. 8 steps to the wall. Turn. 8 steps back. Her phone sat on the desk like a live grenade. Someone knew. Someone had footage. Someone was watching. A knock at the door made her freeze. "Brennan?" Torres's voice muffled through steel. "You in there?" She didn't answer. "I saw the lights on, just checking you're okay." Sarah crossed to the door and opened it halfway. Torres stood in the hallway holding 2 paper cups of coffee that smelled like it had been sitting on a burner for 6 hours. "Couldn't sleep," he said, offering 1 cup. "Figured you couldn't either." She took it. The heat burned through the cheap paper, but she didn't let go. Torres leaned against the doorframe. "Hell of a day." "Yeah." "Keller showing up like that? You know that was coming?" "No." "Lucky timing, then." Sarah sipped the coffee. It tasted like burnt rubber and regret. "You believe in luck?" "Sometimes." Torres studied her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have." "Want to talk about it?" "No." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He straightened. "Walsh wants everyone in the briefing room at 0700. Something about new protocols for the dogs. Probably more paperwork." "I'll be there." Torres started to leave, then stopped. "Hey, what you did today? Standing up to that board? That took guts." Sarah met his eyes. "Or stupidity." "Sometimes they're the same thing." He smiled slightly. "Get some sleep, Sergeant." He disappeared down the hallway. Sarah closed the door and leaned against it. The coffee went cold in her hand. Outside, the bass settled into the quiet rhythm of night watch. Distant footsteps. A vehicle engine. The low thrum of generators keeping everything running. She looked at her phone again. The screen stayed dark. But the threat was still there, waiting, like everything else in her life that refused to stay buried. Notes. Morning came too fast. Sarah showed up to the briefing room at 06:55 with her hair pulled back and her uniform pressed and the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. Walsh was already there, along with Keller and a man Sarah didn't recognize. Mid-50s, civilian clothes, the kind of face that had spent decades learning how to reveal nothing. "Sergeant Brennan," Keller said. "This is James Hartwell. He's with DoD Oversight. He's got some questions about the K-9 recovery program." Hartwell didn't offer his hand, just studied her with the flat expression of someone conducting an autopsy. "Staff Sergeant, I've been reviewing your service record." "Which one?" His mouth twitched. Almost a smile. "The real one." Sarah sat down across from him. Torres slipped in through the door and took a position near the back wall. Hartwell opened a slim folder. "You were embedded with Joint Special Operations for 3 years. Combat medicine, trauma stabilization, K-9 recovery protocols." He looked up. "You also served as convoy lead for multiple high-risk operations in active combat zones." Sarah's pulse kicked up. "That's correct." "Operation Blackwater, June 2023. You were driving the lead vehicle when Staff Sergeant Nathan Cross's transport hit an improvised explosive device." The room went very quiet. "Yes," Sarah said. "Cross was killed instantly. You survived with minor injuries. 2 other personnel in your vehicle sustained moderate trauma." Hartwell's eyes didn't leave hers. The after-action report listed the IED as a missed detection, buried deeper than standard protocols. Command determined no negligence on your part. That's what the report said. "But you don't believe it." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. "I was cleared by the investigation board." "That's not what I asked." She held his gaze. "I was driving. Cross died. I didn't. You want me to say I'm responsible? Fine, I'm responsible." "That's not how IEDs work, Sergeant." "Doesn't change how it feels." Hartwell was quiet for a moment. Then he closed the folder. "The footage you were threatened with last night, it doesn't exist." Sarah's blood went cold. "What?" "Someone sent you a message claiming they have blast footage from Operation Blackwater. They don't. All mission recordings from that operation were classified and sealed. Nobody outside DoD intelligence has access." He leaned forward. "Which means someone's trying to leverage you with a bluff." "Why?" "That's what I'm here to find out." Hartwell glanced at Keller. "We've been tracking irregularities in military K-9 asset disposals for 18 months. The Vega situation at Riverside was just one branch. There's a larger operation behind it. Contractors falsifying evaluations to justify terminations, then selling the dogs to private security firms overseas." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. "You're saying someone's trafficking military working dogs?" "I'm saying someone built a very profitable pipeline. And when you started rehabilitating dogs that were supposed to be dead, you became a problem." Torres stepped forward. "Who sent the message?" We're working on it. Hartwell stood. In the meantime, Sergeant Brennan stays on base. No solo movements, no external communications, and if you receive another threat, you report it immediately. Sarah's hands curled into fists under the table. I'm not hiding. You're not being asked to hide. You're being asked to stay alive long enough for us to close this investigation. Hartwell looked at Keller. Major, make sure she understands the stakes here. He left without waiting for a response. The room stayed silent for several long seconds. Then Walsh exhaled slowly. Well, that was terrifying. Keller crossed his arms. Brennan, you following this? Someone's selling dogs that are supposed to be euthanized. I'm screwing up their supply chain. They want me gone. Simplified but accurate. Keller's expression hardened. Which means you don't take unnecessary risks. You don't go off base alone. You don't engage with anyone you don't trust. What about the dogs? What about them? If I'm under protective protocols, who's running their rehabilitation? Walsh stepped in. I'll handle it. You don't know their routines, their triggers, their... Then you'll brief me. Walsh's voice went sharp. You want these dogs to survive? Then you need to survive first. End of discussion. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to push back, but the logic was solid and she knew it. Fine, she said finally. Keller nodded. Good. Torres, you're her shadow until further notice. She goes nowhere alone. Torres straightened. Yes, sir. Dismissed. They filed out of the briefing room into morning sunlight that felt too bright and too normal for the conversation they'd just had. Sarah walked toward the kennels. Torres fell into step beside her. You okay? He asked quietly. No? Fair. He was silent for a moment. For what it's worth, what happened with Cross? That wasn't on you. You don't know that. I know IEDs. I know convoy operations. And I know that sometimes people die, and it's nobody's fault except the bastards who planted the bomb. Sarah didn't respond. They reached Kennel 7 and found Reaper standing at the gate, watching their approach with those dark, knowing eyes. She unlocked the gate and stepped inside. The dog pressed against her leg, solid and warm and real. You ever think about what happens after? She asked quietly. Torres leaned against the fence. After what? After we finish their rehabilitation, after they're cleared for service, what happens to them? They get reassigned, new handlers, new units. And if they can't handle that, then we try again. And if we can't, Torres was quiet. Then we did everything we could. Sarah looked down at Reaper. That's not good enough. It's all we've got. Hold on. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of controlled routine. Sarah worked with the dogs under Walsh's supervision. Torres stayed within shouting distance. Keller's MPs patrolled the kennel perimeter like they were guarding a forward operating base instead of a training facility. No more messages came through. No more threats materialized. But Sarah felt it anyway, the weight of being watched, the sense that something was moving just outside her peripheral vision. On the fourth day, Agent Monroe returned. She found Sarah in the training yard running havoc through explosives detection drills. The Belgian Malinois moved through the course with focused intensity, signaling each planted device with the same precision he'd shown during the evaluation. Monroe watched from the fence line until Sarah called a break. Impressive, Monroe said. Sarah handed Havoc off to one of the kennel techs. You here for a progress report or something else? Something else. Monroe gestured toward the admin building. Walk with me. They crossed the yard in silence. Torres shadowed them from 20 feet back. Inside, Monroe led them to a small conference room and closed the door. She pulled out a tablet and set it on the table. We identified the source of your threat message, she said without preamble. Sarah felt her pulse spike. Who? Dr. Richard Kellerman, the specialist from your evaluation board. He's in custody. He was. Monroe's expression darkened. Federal holding facility in Denver. Someone posted his bail 3 hours ago using a shell corporation we're still tracing. Jesus. It gets worse. Monroe swiped through several screens. Kellerman had contact with 12 different private military contractors over the past 18 months, all of them specializing in overseas security operations, all of them purchasing trained K-9 assets. Sarah stared at the tablet. How many dogs? 63 confirmed. Maybe more. Monroe looked up. Vega and Kellerman were the medical gatekeepers. They flagged dogs for termination, falsified the paperwork, then sold them through intermediaries. The buyers thought they were getting legally surplus animals. The military thought the dogs were being euthanized. And the dogs? Shipped overseas, some to legitimate security firms, others to— Monroe hesitated. Less legitimate operations. Sarah felt sick. Combat zones. Private military contractors operating in conflict regions. Places where regulations are loose and nobody asked too many questions about where the dogs came from. Torres swore quietly from his position by the door. Monroe closed the tablet. You shut down their pipeline, Brennan. The dogs you rehabilitated were supposed to be dead and profitable. Instead, they're alive and creating a paper trail that leads straight back to the people running this operation. So they want me gone before I can testify. Or before you rehabilitate more dogs, or before the investigation expands. Monroe leaned forward. Point is, you're a liability, and these people have already demonstrated they're willing to kill to protect their investment. Sarah's hands curled into fists. Cross. Monroe's expression shifted. What about him? Operation Blackwater, the IED that killed him. Was it actually an IED? The after-action report. I know what the report says. I'm asking what actually happened. Monroe was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, We're looking into it. The room went cold. You think someone targeted him? Sarah said slowly. I think Staff Sergeant Cross was the primary K-9 handler for a unit that lost 4 dogs in 6 months. All of them flagged for behavioral issues. All of them subsequently sold through the same pipeline we're investigating now. Monroe met her eyes. And I think it's a hell of a coincidence that he died 2 weeks before he was supposed to testify at an internal review about asset disposal protocols. Sarah felt the world tilt. He knew. Cross knew something was wrong. We believe so. And they killed him for it. We're still gathering evidence. That's not a denial. Monroe didn't respond. Sarah stood abruptly. The chair scraped against concrete. I need air. She walked out before anyone could stop her. She made it halfway across the yard before her legs gave out. Torres caught her elbow. Easy. I'm fine. You're not. He guided her to a bench near the obstacle course. Sit. Sarah sat. The Montana sky stretched overhead, pale blue and endless and completely indifferent to the fact that her entire world had just inverted. Cross hadn't died because of bad intel. He'd died because he asked questions, because he cared about the dogs under his command, because he tried to do the right thing. And Sarah had spent 3 years thinking it was her fault. It wasn't an accident, she said quietly. Torres sat beside her. You don't know that. Monroe wouldn't have mentioned it if they didn't have evidence. Evidence isn't proof. It's enough. Sarah pressed her palms against her eyes. He knew. He tried to stop it, and they killed him. If that's true, then the people who did it are going to pay for it. That doesn't bring him back. No, but it means his death wasn't meaningless. Sarah lowered her hands. Across the yard, Reaper stood at the fence of Kennel 7, watching her, like he knew, like he'd always known. He's still waiting, she said. For what? For someone to finish what Cross started. Torres followed her gaze. You think that's you? I think I'm the only one left who can. That night, Sarah sat in her quarters with the lights off and her service pistol disassembled on the desk. She cleaned each piece methodically. Barrel, slide, magazine. The ritual was automatic. Muscle memory from years of late-night weapon maintenance in forward operating bases where staying sharp meant staying alive. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it for 3 full seconds before picking it up. The message was simple. Hangar 6, midnight. Come alone or the dogs die. Sarah's blood went cold. She took a screenshot and forwarded it to Monroe, Keller, and Walsh. Then she checked the pistol's action, loaded a magazine, and holstered it under her jacket. Torres was waiting outside her door when she stepped into the hallway. Where are you going? He asked. Hangar 6. The hell you are? They threatened the dogs. So we call it in. Let Keller's people handle it. And if they kill the dogs while we're waiting for backup? Torres grabbed her arm. This is a trap, Brennan. You know it's a trap. I know. She pulled free. But I'm going anyway. Then I'm coming with you. The message said alone. I don't care what the message said. Sarah met his eyes. If something happens to me, someone needs to take care of those dogs. Someone who knows their routines, their triggers, everything I've been working on. She paused. That's you. Sarah, promise me. Torres's jaw tightened. This is a bad idea. Promise me. He exhaled slowly. Fine, I promise. Good. She checked her watch. Give me 30 minutes. If I'm not back, come in heavy. She walked away before he could argue. Waltz. Hangar 6 sat on the eastern edge of the base, one of the old logistics buildings scheduled for demolition. The exterior lights were dark. The main door hung partially open. Sarah approached slowly, hand on her weapon, every sense dialed to maximum. The night air tasted cold. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out and went silent. She slipped through the door into darkness. Her eyes adjusted gradually. Empty space, concrete floor, stripped equipment racks along the walls, and in the center of the hangar, a single overhead light. Standing beneath it, Dr. Richard Kellerman. He looked different outside the sterile environment of the evaluation board. Older, harder. The kind of tired that came from making too many compromises for too many years. Staff Sergeant Brennan, he said, thank you for coming. Sarah stayed near the door, hand still on her pistol. Where are the dogs? Safe, for now. That's not an answer. Kellerman smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Always so direct. Cross was like that too. Sarah's grip tightened. Don't say his name. Why not? We're here because of him. All of this, he gestured around the empty hangar, started because Nathan Cross couldn't leave well enough alone. He tried to stop you from trafficking military dogs. He tried to interfere with a system that's been in place for over a decade, a system that works, that's efficient, that removes problematic assets and recoups costs in the process. Those assets are soldiers. Those assets are animals, expensive, highly trained animals that become liabilities the moment they develop behavioral issues. Kellerman's expression hardened. Do you have any idea how much it costs to maintain a combat K9 through retirement? Medical care, behavioral therapy, specialized housing, we're talking hundreds of thousands per dog. So you kill them instead. We relocate them, give them purpose in private sector operations where they can continue serving. You sell them to the highest bidder and pocket the difference. Kellerman shrugged. Tomato, tomato. Sarah took a step forward. Cross figured it out, and you killed him for it. We didn't kill anyone. Kellerman's voice went cold. Cross's death was an operational casualty. Wrong place, wrong time. These things happen in war zones. You targeted his convoy. We facilitated an opportunity. There's a difference. Sarah felt something break open inside her chest. You murdered a soldier to cover up your trafficking operation. We protected a system that's generated over $40 million in recovered costs over the past 10 years. Kellerman stepped forward into the light. You think the military actually cares about individual dogs? They care about budgets, about efficiency, about keeping operations running smoothly. We provided that service. And when I started rehabilitating dogs you'd already written off, you became a problem, one we're here to solve. Movement in the shadows. Sarah spun, drawing her weapon. 3 men emerged from the darkness, private contractors by the look of them, armed, professional, moving with the kind of coordination that came from working together in places where mistakes were fatal. Sarah backed toward the door. You're not walking out of here. Neither are you, Kellerman said calmly. This base is about to experience a tragic training accident, faulty munitions storage, multiple casualties. By the time anyone sorts through the wreckage, you'll be listed as one of the victims. The investigation will conclude it was negligence on your part. Your record will be sealed, and the K9 recovery program will be quietly shut down. The FBI knows everything. The FBI knows what we've allowed them to know, and by morning, their primary witness will be dead. Kellerman nodded to the contractors. Make it quick. No unnecessary suffering. The contractors raised their weapons. Sarah dove behind a support beam as gunfire erupted. Rounds sparked off concrete. The noise was deafening in the enclosed space. She returned fire. 2 shots. One of the contractors went down. The other 2 scattered for cover. Sarah ran deeper into the hangar, using equipment racks and structural supports as concealment. Her mind raced through tactical options. 3 hostiles, unknown number of rounds, limited cover, no backup for 25 more minutes. Bad odds. A voice called out from the darkness. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Sergeant." Sarah didn't respond. She moved silently along the eastern wall, putting distance between herself and her last position. Another voice. Different contractor. "We've got thermal. Can't hide heat signature." Shit. Sarah looked up. 20 feet overhead, a catwalk ran the length of the hangar. Old maintenance access. If she could reach it. Gunfire ripped through the space where she'd been crouched 3 seconds earlier. She ran, sprinted for a ladder bolted to the wall. Rounds chased her. One hit the ladder rung 6 inches from her hand. She kept climbing, reached the catwalk, kept moving. The metal grating echoed under her boots, but she didn't slow down. Behind her, one of the contractors started climbing. Sarah reached the far end of the catwalk and looked down. 30 feet to the concrete floor. No other exit. She was trapped. The contractor reached the catwalk, raised his weapon, and then the main hangar door exploded inward. Torres came through first, then 4 MPs, then Keller and Monroe, both armed, both moving with the kind of controlled aggression that meant this was no longer an arrest. It was a takedown. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." The contractor on the catwalk spun toward the new threat. Sarah didn't hesitate. She fired once. Center mass. The contractor dropped. Below, the second contractor tried to run. The MPs cut him off. He went down hard under 3 sets of hands. Kellerman stood in the center of the hangar, hands half raised, expression more annoyed than afraid. Monroe walked up to him. "Dr. Richard Kellerman, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder of a federal witness, and about 15 other charges my assistant will read to you on the way to processing." She nodded to the MPs. "Take him." They hauled Kellerman away. Monroe looked up at Sarah. "You good?" Sarah holstered her weapon. Her hands were shaking. "Yeah, that was incredibly stupid." "I know. Also incredibly brave." "Wasn't trying to be brave." "Never is." Monroe smiled slightly. "Come on down. Let's get you checked out." Sarah climbed down the ladder on legs that felt like water. When she reached the ground, Torres was waiting. "You're an idiot," he said. "I know. I'm never letting you out of my sight again." "That seems excessive. That seems mandatory." He grabbed her shoulder. "You okay?" "No, but I will be." Keller appeared from the shadows. "Brennan, walk with me." They left the hangar and stood in the cold night air. Emergency vehicles approached in the distance, lights flashing red and blue against the darkness. "Kellerman talked," Keller said. "In custody. Started bargaining the moment Monroe threatened him with capital murder charges. He gave us names, locations, financial records, the entire network." He paused. "Including the people who ordered the hit on Cross." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. "Who?" "Contractor firm called Titan Solutions. They facilitated the IED placement, made it look like enemy action. Cross never saw it coming." "And the people who ordered it?" "Senior leadership. Military procurement officers taking kickbacks. Pentagon civilians looking the other way." Keller's expression hardened. "This goes higher than anyone thought. But it's over now. Monroe's team is making arrests as we speak. By morning, 53 people will be in federal custody." Sarah looked up at the sky. Stars scattered across black infinity. "Cross spent 3 years waiting for someone to care. And you made sure someone finally did. Doesn't bring him back." "No. But it means every dog he tried to protect has a chance now." Keller turned to face her. "The K9 recovery program is being expanded. Full funding, permanent authorization, and they want you to run it." Sarah blinked. "What?" "You prove these dogs can be saved, that they deserve to be saved. Command wants to make it official." He paused. "It's a promotion. Captain. Full medical staff. Facility oversight. The works." Sarah didn't know what to say. "Think about it," Keller said. "You've got 48 hours to decide." He walked away. Sarah stood alone in the darkness, listening to sirens wail through the Montana night. Chica. She found Reaper in his kennel an hour later. The dog was awake, sitting calmly in the center of the enclosure like he'd been waiting. Sarah unlocked the gate and stepped inside, sat down on the concrete floor. Reaper walked over and pressed against her side, solid and warm. "It's over," she said quietly. "The people who killed Cross, they're going to pay for it. All of them." Reaper's ears flicked forward. "You did your job. You waited. You tried to save him." Sarah's voice cracked. "But the mission's over now. You can stand down." The dog looked at her with those dark, knowing eyes, and then he did something he hadn't done in 6 months. He laid down, not tense, not coiled, just relaxed, head on his paws, body loose, finally at rest. Sarah pressed one hand against his neck and felt him breathing. Steady, calm, present. "Yeah," she whispered. "We're okay now. We're going to be okay." She didn't know if she believed it, but sitting there in the quiet darkness with a dog who'd survived what she'd survived, she thought maybe it might actually be true. Morning came cold and bright. Sarah walked to the admin building at 600 and found Walsh waiting outside. "You look terrible," Walsh said. "Feel worse." "Good. Means you're alive." Walsh held out a paper cup of coffee. "Heard about last night. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the dumbest." "Probably both," Walsh smiled. "Keller briefed me on the promotion offer. You taking it?" Sarah sipped the coffee. It tasted like burnt hope. "I don't know. What's stopping you?" "The idea that I might screw it up, that I'm not actually qualified to run a program this important, that 3 months ago I was a night shift nurse everyone thought was a washout, and now I'm supposed to rebuild military canine recovery from the ground up. So you're scared?" "Terrified." "Good," Walsh said. "Means you'll take it seriously. Means you won't get complacent. Means you'll fight for every dog under your care like your life depends on it." She paused. "Which, based on last night, you apparently already do." Sarah looked across the yard toward the kennels. 6 dogs. 6 second chances. 6 soldiers who'd been written off and thrown away until someone finally decided they were worth saving. "I'll think about it," she said. "Think fast. Clock's ticking." Walsh walked away. Sarah stood in the cold morning air watching the sun climb over distant mountains and wondered if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. Her blood ran cold. She opened the message. "You saved the dogs. Now someone needs to save you. Check your service record. Someone changed it overnight. You've been flagged for psychiatric evaluation and immediate discharge. They're coming for you at 800. You have 2 hours." Sarah stared at the screen. One network was down, but clearly another was still operating, and whoever just sent this message knew exactly where to hit her. Sarah forwarded the message to Monroe before the screen even went dark. Then she ran, not toward her quarters, not toward safety. Toward the one place on base where records were kept and altered and buried, the Personnel Administration building 300 yards north of the kennels. Her boots hit pavement hard. The morning air burned her lungs. Behind her, voices called out, but she didn't slow down. The admin building was already open. Early shift clerks filtering in with coffee and the resigned expressions of people facing another day of bureaucratic tedium. Sarah pushed through the main entrance and went straight for the records office. A staff sergeant looked up from his computer, startled. "I need to see my personnel file," Sarah said. "Ma'am, you'll need to submit a formal request. Now." Something in her voice made him stop arguing. He pulled up the system and typed her name. His expression shifted as the file loaded. "What?" Sarah demanded. "It says here you're flagged for immediate psychiatric evaluation. Effective," he checked the timestamp, 0200 this morning. "Who authorized it?" He scrolled down. "Colonel Barbara Wainwright, Medical Review Board." Sarah's blood went cold. "I've never heard of her. She's stationed at Walter Reed, but it says she has jurisdiction over all K-9 program personnel due to specialized oversight requirements." The sergeant looked up. "Ma'am, this is legitimate. If you're flagged, you're required to report to medical evaluation within 24 hours or face administrative discharge." "This is fake. The authorization code checks out." "Then someone faked the code." The sergeant's expression went carefully neutral. That's above my clearance, ma'am. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Keller. It went straight to voicemail. She tried Monroe. Same thing. A voice from the doorway. Staff Sergeant Brennan. She turned. Two military police stood in the hallway, young, professional, hands resting near their sidearms in the universal stance of people prepared to escalate if necessary. Colonel Wainwright has requested your presence at the medical facility, the first MP said. We're here to escort you. I'm not going anywhere until I talk to Major Keller. Major Keller is off base. Colonel Wainwright's orders take precedence. Sarah's mind raced. If she refused, they'd detain her. If she went quietly, she might walk into whatever trap had been set. Either way, she was running out of options. Fine, she said. Let's go. They walked through the cold morning air toward the medical facility. Sarah counted exits, noted sight lines, calculated how many seconds it would take to break away and where she'd run if it came to that. The medical facility was quiet. Too quiet. No early morning staff rushing between wards. No patients in the waiting area. Just empty hallways and fluorescent lights that hummed with the kind of silence that preceded bad news. The MPs led her to a conference room on the second floor and gestured her inside. Colonel Wainwright will be with you shortly. They closed the door. She heard the lock click. Sarah stood in the center of the room, pulse hammering, and waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The door opened. The woman who entered wore a colonel's insignia and a medical corps patch, late 50s, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, the kind of face that had spent decades making decisions other people had to live with. Staff Sergeant Brennan, she said. I'm Colonel Wainwright. Please sit. Sarah remained standing. I want to speak to Major Keller. Major Keller is currently en route to Washington for a briefing on the Kellerman investigation. He won't be available until this evening. Wainwright set a tablet on the table. In the meantime, I've been authorized to conduct your psychiatric evaluation. I don't need a psychiatric evaluation. According to your file, you've experienced significant trauma, combat exposure, loss of unit members, a medical discharge that was never properly followed up with ongoing care. Wainwright's expression didn't shift. Add to that your recent involvement in a hostile engagement that resulted in one fatality, and I'd say an evaluation is not only warranted, it's overdue. This is retaliation. This is protocol. Someone altered my records overnight to manufacture grounds for discharge. Wainwright pulled out a chair and sat. Your records show a pattern of instability dating back 3 years. Multiple facility transfers, difficulty maintaining employment, unauthorized contact with classified personnel. She looked up. Last night you engaged armed hostiles without backup and killed a man. That's not the behavior of someone mentally fit for service. Sarah's hands curled into fists. That man was trying to kill me. According to your account, according to reality. Reality is subjective in high-stress situations. Wainwright folded her hands on the table. I'm here to determine whether you're capable of continuing service or whether you represent a danger to yourself and others. I'm not answering your questions until I have legal representation. You're not under investigation, Sergeant. This is a medical evaluation. You don't have the right to counsel. Sarah felt the trap closing. Then I'm invoking my right to refuse treatment. That's your choice. But refusal will be noted in your file and will result in immediate administrative discharge. You'll lose your rank, your benefits, and any authority over the K-9 recovery program. Wainwright leaned back. Or you can answer a few questions, allow me to conduct a basic assessment, and we can resolve this quickly. The room felt smaller, colder. Sarah sat down slowly. What do you want to know? Let's start with Operation Blackwater. The next hour was surgical. Wainwright asked questions with the precision of someone who already knew the answers and was simply building a record. She probed every detail of the convoy, the blast, Cross's death, Sarah's survival, the guilt, the nightmares, the years of running from something that wouldn't stay buried. Sarah answered carefully, truthfully, but every word felt like handing ammunition to someone who planned to use it against her. Finally, Wainwright set down her stylus. Based on this evaluation, I'm recommending you be placed on immediate medical leave pending further psychiatric review. That's not necessary. That's my professional opinion. Wainwright's expression softened slightly. Sergeant, you've been through trauma that would break most people. There's no shame in admitting you need help. I don't need help. I need to finish my work. The work will continue without you. No, it won't. Sarah leaned forward. Those dogs need someone who understands what they've been through, someone who's lived it. You put them under standard protocols and they'll shut down again. Then we'll find another specialist. There aren't any. I'm one of 3 canine trauma recovery experts left in the country. The other 2 are deployed overseas. Sarah's voice went hard. You remove me from this program and those dogs die. That's not your decision to make anymore. The door opened. Agent Monroe stepped inside, flanked by 2 FBI agents Sarah didn't recognize. Wainwright stood. Agent Monroe, this is a closed medical evaluation. Not anymore. Monroe held up a tablet. Colonel Barbara Wainwright, you're under arrest for falsification of military records, obstruction of a federal investigation, and conspiracy to interfere with a federal witness. Wainwright's face went pale. That's absurd. Is it? Monroe tapped the screen. Because according to records we just pulled, you don't actually have oversight authority over K9 personnel. You're a cardiac surgeon at Walter Reed with 0 psychiatric credentials. Your authorization codes were stolen from a legitimate medical review board and used to create a fake evaluation order. I was following orders. Whose orders? Wainwright didn't answer. Monroe nodded to the agents. Take her. They moved forward. Wainwright tried to pull away, but they cuffed her with the kind of efficiency that came from doing it 1,000 times before. As they led her toward the door, Wainwright looked back at Sarah. You think this is over? You think arresting a few people solves anything? Her voice went cold. This network has been operating for 15 years. You've barely touched the surface. Then we'll keep digging, Monroe said flatly. They hauled Wainwright out. Sarah sat in the silent conference room, hands shaking, trying to process what had just happened. Monroe pulled out a chair and sat across from her. You okay? Getting tired of that question. Getting tired of having to ask it. Monroe set the tablet on the table. Kellerman gave us Wainwright's name during his plea negotiation. Turns out she's been the medical gatekeeper for the entire operation. Any dog or handler that threatened to expose the trafficking network got flagged for psychiatric issues and pushed out of service. How many? We're still counting, but it's in the hundreds. Sarah felt sick. Hundreds of soldiers discharged because they asked the wrong questions, or because they cared too much. Monroe's expression hardened. Wainwright built her career on being the person who cleaned up problems quietly, made them disappear. The network paid her 6 figures a year to make sure nobody looked too closely at where the dogs were really going. And when I started rehabilitating them, you became the biggest threat she'd ever faced. Because you weren't just asking questions, you were proving the system was broken. Sarah looked down at her hands. Cross figured it out 3 years ago, tried to report it, got killed for it. And now everyone who helped cover it up is going to answer for it. That doesn't bring him back. No, but it means he didn't die for nothing. Monroe stood. Come on, Keller's back from Washington. He wants to see you. They found Keller in the command building, standing in front of a wall covered in photographs, documents, and red string connecting dozens of faces and locations. A conspiracy board straight out of a crime procedural. Brennan, he didn't turn around. Glad you're still free. Barely. Heard about Wainwright. Nice work, Monroe. Just following the trail. Monroe crossed her arms. What's Washington's position? They're panicking. Keller finally turned. This investigation has exposed corruption in procurement, medical services, asset disposal, and oversight. We're talking dozens of senior officers, Pentagon civilians, defense contractors, the kind of people who thought they were untouchable. Are they? Not anymore, Keller gestured to the board. We've identified 83 personnel directly involved in the trafficking network, another 140 who knew about it and looked the other way. Congressional hearings start next month. Criminal trials probably start by summer. Sarah studied the board. Faces she recognized, names she'd heard, people who'd built careers on decisions that destroyed lives. What about the dogs? She asked quietly. Keller's expression softened. That's why you're here. He pulled out a folder. DoD authorization came through this morning. The K9 Recovery and Rehabilitation Program is now a permanent division. Full funding, dedicated facilities, and you've been promoted to captain with command authority over all operations.
Sarah took the folder but didn't open it. I didn't ask for this.
You earned it, Keller paused. You proved these dogs can be saved, that they deserve to be saved. Command wants to make sure that never gets buried again. What if I screw it up? Then you'll fix it. That's what leaders do. Sarah looked at the folder, at the insignia pin clipped to the first page, Captain's Bars, the kind of responsibility she'd spent 3 years running from. When do I start? She asked. You already have. Keller smiled slightly. Welcome back to the fight, Captain.
August is done.
The next 3 days blurred together. Sarah moved into a new office. Actual walls, actual windows, a desk that wasn't held together with duct tape. She assembled a team, Torres as her second-in-command, Walsh as chief veterinary officer, a dozen specialists pulled from bases across the country who actually understood trauma recovery instead of just pushing pills and filing paperwork. The 6 dogs she'd rehabilitated became the foundation, proof of concept, living evidence that the system could work if people actually tried. Blitz was reassigned to a veteran handler who'd lost his previous K9 to cancer. They bonded within hours. Havoc went to an explosives disposal unit that needed a detection dog willing to work in high-stress environments. He thrived. Ash joined a search and rescue team in Colorado, where the work was focused and the noise was controlled. He finally stopped flinching. Titan became a security dog at a VA hospital, where his protective instincts could be channeled into keeping vulnerable people safe. Scout was placed with a wounded veteran recovering from his own injuries. They helped each other heal, and Reaper stayed with Sarah, because some bonds couldn't be reassigned. Some connections went deeper than training or protocol, and some soldiers needed to stay together because they'd seen the same darkness and survived the same fire. On the 4th day, Sarah stood in the training yard at dawn watching Reaper run obstacle courses with the kind of joy that came from finally being free of the weight he'd carried for so long. Torres appeared at her shoulder. You did it. We did it. Semantics. He was quiet for a moment. You hear about the congressional hearing? Bits and pieces. Vega's testifying. Kellerman too. They're both trying to cut deals, throwing everyone else under the bus to save themselves. Will it work? Monroe says no. Too much evidence. Too many victims willing to testify. Torres paused. Cross's family is flying in next week. They want to meet you. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. What am I supposed to say to them? The truth. That their son tried to do the right thing. That he didn't die for nothing. That because of him, dozens of dogs and soldiers are alive today who wouldn't be otherwise. That's not enough. It's all we've got. Sarah called Reaper over. The dog returned immediately and sat at her heel, tongue lolling, eyes bright. Yeah, she said quietly. I guess it is. Mkait. The congressional hearing was scheduled for Monday morning at 9 a.m. Sarah watched it on a live stream from her office, coffee going cold in her hand, as one after another, the people who'd built the trafficking network tried to explain away 15 years of corruption. Vega went first, blamed pressure from hospital administration, blamed budget constraints, blamed everyone except himself. I was following orders, he told the committee. Whose orders? A senator asked. Dr. Kellerman's. He had oversight authority. And you never questioned those orders? Vega hesitated. No. Not even when you were falsifying medical records and condemning soldiers to euthanasia? They were dogs, not soldiers. The room erupted. The senator had to call for order. Kellerman testified next, tried a different approach, claimed the system was broken, and he was just trying to fix it. That relocating problematic dogs was more humane than keeping them in government facilities where they suffered. You made $4 million over 10 years, another senator pointed out. That sounds less like humanitarianism and more like profiteering, Kellerman's lawyer objected. It didn't matter. The damage was done. Wainwright refused to testify, invoked her Fifth Amendment rights, and sat stone-faced while the committee read through her financial records. Payments from shell corporations, offshore accounts, a paper trail that connected her to every major contractor involved in the trafficking operation. Then they called the victims, handlers who'd been discharged for asking questions, veterans who'd lost their K9 partners to suspicious euthanasia orders, Family members of soldiers who died under circumstances that suddenly looked a lot less accidental. Cross's mother testified last. Sarah watched through blurred vision as a woman in her 60s stood before the committee and spoke about her son with the kind of controlled grief that came from years of unanswered questions finally being acknowledged. Nathan knew something was wrong, she said. He told me they were getting rid of dogs that could be saved, that someone was making money off it. He said he was going to report it. Her voice cracked. 2 weeks later, he was dead. And you believe his death was connected to his investigation? A senator asked gently. I know it was. The committee went silent. The senator looked directly at the camera. This committee will be recommending immediate criminal prosecution for everyone involved in this network. We will also be introducing legislation to completely overhaul military K-9 asset management and establish permanent oversight to ensure nothing like this ever happens again. Applause broke out in the gallery. Sarah turned off the stream and sat in the quiet office, staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. She almost didn't open it, almost deleted it without reading, but something made her look. You think this is over? It's not. We lost this round. But the network is bigger than you know, bigger than anyone knows, and you just made yourself the primary target. Watch your back, Captain. We'll be watching you. Sarah stared at the message. Then she took a screenshot and forwarded it to Monroe with a single word. Trace. The response came back in under a minute. Already on it. Stay on base. Do not engage. Sarah set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the training yard stretched empty and quiet in the afternoon light. Somewhere in the kennels, Reaper was resting, safe, finally at peace. But the threat was real. The message made that clear. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Evening came cold and dark. Sarah did her final rounds through the kennels, checking on each dog, making sure everything was secured for the night. Torres shadowed her from 20 feet back, silent presence that had become routine. When they reached Kennel 7, Reaper stood waiting at the gate. Sarah let herself inside. The dog pressed against her leg, solid and warm. You feel it too? She asked quietly. Reaper's ears flicked. Something's coming. Something worse than what we just survived. The dog looked up at her with those dark, knowing eyes. Sarah knelt down and pressed her forehead against his. We'll be ready. Whatever it is, we'll be ready. A voice from the doorway made them both turn. Walsh stood in the shadows, expression unreadable. Captain, we need to talk. About what? About the fact that your security detail just found explosive residue on your vehicle. About the fact that someone tried to plant a device under your truck and got interrupted before they could finish. Walsh's voice went hard. About the fact that whoever sent you that message isn't just threatening. They're actively trying to kill you. Sarah stood slowly. Where's my truck now? Bomb disposal's checking it. Keller's locked down the entire motor pool. Walsh stepped into the kennel. Monroe wants you in protective custody until they figure out who got on base. I'm not hiding. Nobody's asking you to hide. They're asking you to stay alive. I'm more useful working. You're no use to anyone dead. Sarah looked at Reaper, at Torres standing guard outside, at the kennels full of dogs who depended on her to keep fighting. Fine, she said finally, but I'm not leaving the base, and Reaper comes with me. Walsh nodded. Fair enough. They walked through the dark compound toward the secure housing unit on the north side of base. MPs flanked them. Vehicles with mounted lights swept the perimeter. The whole base had shifted into high alert. Sarah's mind raced. Someone had gotten through security. Someone with access. Someone who knew her routines well enough to target her vehicle at exactly the right time. An insider. They reached the housing unit. Reinforced structure, limited access. The kind of place they put people who needed protection from threats, both external and internal. Monroe was waiting inside. Bomb disposal found C4, military grade, sophisticated trigger mechanism designed to detonate when you hit 25 miles per hour. Her expression was grim. If you'd driven off base this morning, you'd be dead. Who has access to military explosives on this base? Officially, ordnance personnel, security forces, special operations units rotating through. Unofficially, anyone with the right connections and enough cash. Monroe pulled up a tablet. We're running background checks on everyone who had access to the motor pool in the last 48 hours. It's a long list. Narrow it down to anyone with ties to the contractors we arrested. Already doing that. Sarah paced the small room. This isn't random. Whoever planted that bomb knew exactly where I'd be and when. Which means someone's been watching you closely. Or someone on your team is feeding them information. Monroe's expression darkened. That's a serious accusation. It's the only explanation that makes sense. Sarah stopped pacing. Kellerman's in custody. Wainwright's in custody. Vega's testifying for the prosecution. But the network is still operating, still coordinating, still trying to eliminate threats. You think there's another layer we haven't found yet? I think we've been chasing middle management while the real power stayed hidden. Monroe was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "If you're right, then everyone on this base is potentially compromised." "Not everyone," Sarah looked at Torres. "But enough." Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. She showed Monroe the screen without opening it. Monroe pulled out her own phone and made a call. "Tech team, I need a trace on an incoming message to Captain Brennan's cell. Stand by." Sarah opened the message. "Good instincts, Captain." "You're right. We're closer than you think. In fact, the lights went out. Complete darkness. Emergency systems failed to kick in. No backup power. Just absolute blackness and the sound of her own pulse hammering in her ears. Monroe's voice cut through the dark. Everyone stay calm. Torres, get Brennan to the interior safe room. Now." Movement in the darkness. Torres grabbed Sarah's arm. "Come on." They moved through the blackness by feel. Sarah kept one hand on Reaper's collar. The dog stayed calm, moving with practiced silence. Somewhere outside, gunfire erupted. Short, controlled bursts. Then silence. They reached the safe room, reinforced walls, independent power supply, communications equipment. Torres pushed Sarah inside and locked the door behind them. Emergency lights flickered on, dim red glow. Sarah pulled out her phone. The message was still open. "We're already inside." Her blood went cold. Because if someone had breached the secure housing unit, if they'd managed to cut power and bypass security, then this wasn't just an assassination attempt. This was a tactical operation. And somewhere in the darkness outside that door, someone was hunting her. Torres killed the red emergency light with a sharp twist. Total darkness swallowed the safe room. "Stay quiet," he breathed. Sarah crouched low, one hand on Reaper's collar. The dog's muscles coiled beneath her palm, not panicked, but ready. Outside the reinforced door, footsteps moved with tactical precision. Multiple hostiles. Professional, coordinated. A voice cut through the darkness. Familiar. Wrong. "Captain Brennan, we know you're in there." Sarah's blood froze. "Major David Keller," Torres swore under his breath. Sarah's mind raced, replaying every conversation, every briefing, every moment Keller had been present. The way he'd shown up at Riverside with federal authority. The way he'd suspended the evaluation board at exactly the right moment. The way he'd known things before anyone reported them. Because he'd been controlling the information flow from the beginning. "You've been running the network," Sarah called out. "The whole time." Silence. Then Keller's voice again, closer now. "Not running it, protecting it. There's a difference. You killed Cross. Cross was collateral damage. He got too close to exposing an operation that's been funding Black Ops programs for 15 years. Programs that keep soldiers like you alive overseas. You think the military runs on idealism?" Keller's laugh was bitter. "It runs on money. And the K9 trafficking network generated $40 million that went into operations Congress would never approve." Torres shifted beside her. Sarah felt his hand move toward his sidearm. "Don't," Keller said, like he could see through walls. "I've got 4 operators out here with thermal scopes. You breach that door, and you're dead before you clear the frame." Sarah's mind calculated options. The safe room had independent power but limited supplies. No second exit. Communications equipment that might or might not still work with the base-wide blackout. She reached for the radio handset mounted on the wall. Keyed it once. Dead air. "Looking for backup?" Keller asked. "Monroe's team is currently dealing with a security breach on the south perimeter. By the time they realize it's a diversion, this will be over. The FBI has everything. Kellerman talked. Wainwright talked. even Vega's testifying. They talked about middle management, about contractors and doctors, about the people we wanted them to find. Keller's voice went cold. You think someone like Vega could run an international trafficking operation? He could barely manage a hospital budget. We gave you exactly what you needed to feel like you'd won. Sarah felt the pieces click into place. You led the investigation. You controlled what evidence we found, what arrests we made. And you played your part perfectly. The traumatized soldier fighting for justice, the whistleblower taking down corruption. It made for great congressional testimony. He paused. But you got greedy. Started asking questions about funding sources, about who really benefited from the network. You were supposed to accept your promotion and disappear into administrative work. Instead, I kept digging. Instead, you kept digging. Keller's footsteps stopped directly outside the door. I actually respect that, but respect doesn't change the math. You're a loose end, and loose ends don't survive in this business. Torres leaned close to Sarah's ear. Service tunnel, behind the equipment rack, leads to the basement maintenance corridor. Sarah's fingers found the rack in the darkness, felt the gap behind it. Narrow. Maybe wide enough for one person at a time. How long before they breached the door, she whispered. 3 minutes, maybe less. Not enough time to escape, but maybe enough time to do something else. Sarah pulled out her phone. The screen glow felt like a searchlight in the darkness. She opened the voice recorder app and set it on the floor near the door, maximum sensitivity. Then she pushed Torres toward the service tunnel. Go, she breathed. Not without you. I'm right behind you, move. Torres hesitated. Then he grabbed Reaper's collar and pulled the dog toward the equipment rack. Sarah heard them squeeze through the gap. Metal scraping, a muffled grunt. Then silence. She positioned herself near the tunnel entrance and called out, Keller, let's make a deal. I'm listening. You let me walk away. I disappear. You'll never hear from me again. And in return, I keep my mouth shut about what you just told me. Keller laughed. You think I'd believe that? I think you want to avoid a firefight that leaves bodies and questions. Clean solutions. That's always been your style. Smart. Footsteps again. But not smart enough. See, the thing about loose ends is they only stay quiet when they're dead. The door exploded inward. Flash grenades detonated. Blinding light, concussive force. Sarah was already moving, diving through the tunnel opening as armed operators flooded the safe room. She's in the wall! Gunfire ripped through the darkness. Rounds punched through drywall and steel. Sarah crawled fast, hands and knees, feeling her way through absolute blackness. Behind her, voices shouted coordinates. Someone was coming through the tunnel after her. She reached a junction, went left. No idea where it led, just away. Away from the guns. Away from Keller's operators. Away from the trap closing around her. The tunnel opened into a maintenance corridor. Emergency lighting here, dim yellow strips along the floor. Sarah ran, found Torres and Reaper at the end of the hallway, Torres with his weapon drawn, covering her approach. Where are we? Sarah gasped. Sub-basement, under the admin building. How do we get out? We don't. Every exit's covered. Torres looked grim. They planned this. They've been planning this for weeks. Maybe longer. Sarah's mind raced. Keller had resources, personnel, authorization to move freely on base. If he'd been planning this operation, he'd have thought through every scenario, except one. The kennels, she said. Torres stared at her. What? Keller doesn't know about the expansion tunnels Walsh has been building. Construction started 2 weeks ago, connecting the kennels to the veterinary facility underground. It's not on any official maps yet. That's on the other side of the base. Then we'd better move fast. They ran. Through maintenance corridors and service tunnels and forgotten spaces that existed in the gaps between official architecture. Reaper moved silently beside them, adapting to every turn, every obstacle. Behind them, voices echoed. Flashlights swept through darkness. They reached a junction where steam pipes ran overhead, and the air tasted like rust and old concrete. Torres stopped, checking his phone for the base map. This connects to the infrastructure tunnel that runs along the eastern perimeter. If we follow it north... Gunfire cut him off. Rounds sparked off pipes. Torres shoved Sarah behind a concrete pillar and returned fire. 3 shots. Then his weapon clicked empty. Reload, Sarah shouted. Out! He threw the empty magazine. That was my last one. Sarah drew her own sidearm. 15 rounds. Not enough if Keller's entire team was hunting them. Keep moving, Torres said. I'll slow them down. You're out of ammo. I'll figure something out. No. Sarah grabbed his arm. We stay together. Movement in the darkness ahead, not behind them. Ahead. Two figures emerged from the shadows. Walsh and Monroe, both armed, both moving with the kind of focused intensity that came from combat experience most people didn't know they had. Where the hell have you been? Sarah demanded. Getting answers. Monroe's expression was carved from stone. Keller's not working alone. He's got half of base security on his payroll, but the other half just figured out what's happening. She gestured behind her, and they're not happy about it. Walsh tossed Torres a fresh magazine. Motor pools secured, Southgate's locked down. Keller's trapped on base, same as us. Then we end this, Sarah said. How? Torres asked. Sarah looked at her phone, at the voice recording app still running, at the confession Keller had given while standing outside the safe room door. We make him famous. 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in the base communications center with Monroe's team securing the perimeter. The night shift technician looked terrified as Monroe explained what they needed. I can't just broadcast on military channels without authorization, he stammered. You have authorization. Monroe showed him her badge. Federal override, do it. The technician's hand shook as he pulled up the system. What am I broadcasting? Sarah handed him her phone. This, on every channel, base-wide, and route it to DoD headquarters, FBI field office, and congressional oversight. That's going to reach thousands of people. That's the idea. The technician loaded the file. His finger hovered over the broadcast button. Once this goes out, I can't pull it back. Then don't pull it back. Sarah met his eyes. Hit send. He pressed the button. Keller's voice flooded through every radio, every speaker, every communication device on Fort Baxter. His confession, his admission, his explanation of how the trafficking network had been funding black operations for over a decade. The base erupted. Soldiers poured out of barracks. Officers emerged from command buildings. Everyone who'd been kept in the dark suddenly understood exactly what had been happening in their ranks. And Major David Keller, architect of a 15-year conspiracy, became the most hunted man on the installation. Sarah watched through the communications center windows as lights came back online across the base. Vehicles converged on the secure housing area. MPs surrounded the building where Keller had been operating. Monroe's radio crackled. All units, suspect is barricaded in Building 12 with 4 hostiles, op by fists. We have visual confirmation. Don't breach, Monroe ordered. Contain and wait for my signal. She looked at Sarah. You should stay here. No chance. This is going to get ugly. It already is ugly. Sarah checked her weapon. I'm finishing this. They moved through the cold night air toward Building 12. The entire base had shifted into combat mode. Soldiers took positions behind vehicles. Snipers climbed to elevated positions. Spotlights illuminated the building's exits. Keller's voice came over a loudspeaker. I want safe passage off this base. Transportation to the airfield. Charges dropped in exchange for full cooperation. Not happening, Monroe called back. Come out unarmed. It's over. It's never over. You think shutting down one network stops anything? There are a dozen more just like it. Bigger, better funded. You've won nothing. Then prove me wrong. Come out. Tell us everything. Help us dismantle all of it. Silence. Then gunfire erupted from the building, not aimed at anyone, just wild shots into the night sky. Desperation. Rage. The return fire was immediate and overwhelming. MPS and base security opened up with coordinated precision. Windows shattered. The building's facade cracked and splintered. It lasted 30 seconds. Then silence. Monroe's team moved in. Tactical formation, weapons up, flashlights cutting through smoke and darkness. 5 minutes later, they emerged with Keller in custody. Face bloodied, hands cuffed, eyes empty. He looked directly at Sarah as they walked him past. You think you won. You didn't. You just started a war you can't finish. Sarah stepped close enough that only he could hear her. Cross started it. I'm just making sure he's avenged. Cross was naive. Cross was right. She leaned closer. And now everyone knows it. They hauled Keller away. The remaining operators surrendered without resistance, and Fort Baxter slowly exhaled as the crisis finally ended. Sarah stood in the cold pre-dawn air, watching emergency vehicles flood the base, and felt something inside her finally settle. Not relief, not triumph. Just exhausted recognition that the fight was over, at least this one. Torres found her near the kennels an hour later. "You good?" "Getting there. Keller's talking, trying to cut a deal. Monroe says he's giving up names, connections, everything." "Will it stick?" "With his confession broadcast to half the military? Yeah, it'll stick." Torres was quiet for a moment. "You did it, Captain. You took down the whole network." "We took it down." Semantics again. Sarah smiled faintly. "Yeah." What? The congressional hearing resumed 3 weeks later, this time with Major David Keller in orange prison scrubs, flanked by federal marshals, testifying under oath about 15 years of systematic corruption. Sarah watched from the gallery as senators who'd praised Keller's service just weeks earlier now demanded answers for how he'd built an empire on stolen dogs and murdered handlers. Cross's mother was there. She caught Sarah's eye across the room and nodded once. No words, just acknowledgement. The hearing lasted 6 hours. By the end, Keller had implicated 42 additional personnel, exposed funding channels that reached into congressional offices, detailed operations that had nothing to do with K-9 trafficking, but everything to do with how wars were really funded when official budgets ran dry. When it finally ended, Monroe found Sarah outside the building. "That was thorough," Monroe said. "That was necessary." "Agreed." Monroe pulled out a folder. DoD authorization came through. The K-9 recovery program is being expanded to every major base. You're being promoted to major with oversight authority across all installations. Sarah took the folder. "That's a lot of responsibility." "You've earned it." "Or I'm just the only one left who actually gives a damn." Monroe smiled. "Same thing." 6 months later, Fort Baxter looked different. New construction expanded the kennel facilities. Veterinary staff tripled. Rehabilitation protocols that Sarah developed became standard across all military K-9 operations. Dogs that would have been euthanized under the old system now had fighting chances at recovery. Sarah walked through the training yard at dawn, watching handlers work with dogs who'd been written off as hopeless 6 months earlier. Blitz ran obstacle courses with focused intensity. Havoc detected explosives with the same precision that had saved countless lives overseas. Ash no longer flinched at loud noises. And Reaper walked calmly at Sarah's heel, finally at peace with a mission that had ended years ago but only recently found closure. Torres appeared from the admin building. "Colonel wants to see you." "When?" "Now." Sarah walked into the command building and found Walsh waiting in her office. The promotion to full colonel had suited her, more authority to fight the battles that mattered. "Major Brennan," Walsh said formally. Then she smiled. "Congratulations." "For what?" Walsh gestured to a framed certificate on the wall. "DoD just approved a permanent memorial for all the handlers and K-9s lost to the trafficking network, including Staff Sergeant Nathan Cross and the 47 dogs that died because someone decided budget reports mattered more than soldiers." Sarah stared at the certificate. Cross's name was listed first. Below it, dozens more. A record of lives stolen by a system that had forgotten what service actually meant. "There's something else," Walsh said quietly. She handed Sarah an envelope. "Cross's family wanted you to have this." Sarah opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a photograph. Cross in his dress uniform, younger than Sarah remembered, standing beside Reaper with the kind of smile that came from genuine joy. On the back, someone had written, "Thank you for finishing what Nathan started. Thank you for making sure he didn't die for nothing. And thank you for saving the dog he loved. We couldn't have asked for a better person to carry his fight forward." Sarah's vision blurred. "They came by last week," Walsh continued. "Spent an hour with Reaper. Said they could see how much you've done for him. How much you've done for all of them." She paused. "They asked me to tell you that Nathan would be proud." Sarah couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Walsh stood. "You did good work here, Major. Better than good. You proved that sometimes the people everyone underestimates are exactly the ones who change everything." That evening, Sarah sat on the bench outside Kennel 7, watching the sun set over Montana mountains that stretched endless and indifferent to human struggles. Reaper lay beside her, head resting on her knee, breathing slow and steady. Torres joined her after a few minutes. Didn't say anything, just sat. Companionable silence that came from months of fighting the same battles. "You think it's really over?" he asked finally. "The trafficking network? Yeah, Keller gave up everything. The trials are ongoing. People are going to prison." "That's not what I meant." Sarah knew what he meant. There will always be another fight, another system that needs breaking, another person who thinks profit matters more than people. "So what do we do?" "We keep fighting." Sarah looked down at Reaper. "Because if we don't, then everything Cross died for, everything these dogs survived, it all means nothing." Torres nodded slowly. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think 3 years ago you ran away from combat because you thought you'd failed, that you'd let people down, that you weren't strong enough to keep fighting." Sarah didn't respond. "But you were wrong," Torres continued. "You weren't running from weakness. You were running from pain. And there's a difference. Weak people quit when things get hard. You just needed time to remember why you started fighting in the first place." Sarah felt something break open in her chest. "And what's that?" "Because you actually give a damn. Because when everyone else looks at a traumatized dog or a broken soldier and sees a liability, you see someone worth saving." He paused. "That's not weakness, Sarah. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen." The sun dropped below the mountains. Darkness crept across the training yard. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Another answered. Sarah stood slowly. Reaper rose with her. "Come on," she said. "We've got work to do." "Now? It's almost 2100. "Then we'd better get started." Torres laughed. "You're relentless, you know that?" "I prefer determined." "Same thing. Not even close." They walked toward the kennels where 6 more dogs waited, recent arrivals, all flagged for behavioral issues, all facing termination orders if Sarah couldn't prove they were worth saving. She'd proved it before. She'd prove it again, as many times as necessary. Because that's what leaders did. They showed up when everyone else walked away. They fought battles nobody else wanted to fight. They stood between the vulnerable and the people who'd given up on them. And they won. Not because they were perfect, not because they never felt fear or doubt or exhaustion, but because they knew what mattered. And nothing mattered more than making sure no soldier, human or canine, ever got left behind again. Sarah opened the gate to Kennel 14 and stepped inside. A German Shepherd mix watched her from the corner, eyes wary, body tense. Paperwork said he'd been written off as untrainable, that he'd bitten 3 handlers. That termination was scheduled for Friday. She crouched down slowly, didn't approach, just waited, patient, present. "Hey," she said quietly. "I'm Sarah. I know you're scared. I know you've been through hell. And I know everyone's given up on you." The dog's ears flicked forward. "But I haven't, and I'm not going to." She settled onto the concrete floor, back against the wall. "So whenever you're ready, however long it takes, I'll be right here." The dog watched her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he took 1 step forward, then another, until he stood directly in front of her, close enough to touch, but still uncertain. Sarah extended 1 hand, palm up, offering, not demanding. The dog sniffed once, twice. Then he pressed his nose into her palm and exhaled, the kind of breath that came from finally being safe enough to stop fighting. "Yeah," Sarah whispered. I know. And in that moment, sitting on cold concrete in a kennel nobody else wanted to enter with the dog, everyone else had already decided was hopeless, Sarah Brennan finally understood something she'd been running from for 3 years. She hadn't failed Cross. She'd never failed any of them. She'd just been learning how to save them. And now, finally, she knew how. 1 soldier at a time, 1 dog at a time, 1 life at a time, until there were no more left behind, until everyone worth saving got the second chance they deserved, until the people who thought power and profit mattered more than lives learned what it meant to face someone who'd survived war and came back stronger. The washout nobody took seriously had become the leader nobody could ignore. And she was just getting started.